Thank you for joining us as we remember and honor Dr. David Saphier's memory. It's a strange world we're living in. We are gathering together, but we are nowhere near each other. We are in on the sanctuary, but not really. This is a green screen. We need to use our imagination for a lot of things in the world today. Similar to remembering David, it is hard to believe that David is gone, because there's been many times when he has disappeared from our lives and yet was always still there. We're going to take a moment of our time in our lives at this point and remember him, honor his memory, share some thoughts. Notice that you can chat and leave messages for his family, for his friends. Appreciate you for coming today. Thank you. We take this opportunity to honor the life and remember Dr. David Saphier. This is a very strange and unusual time for everyone, for the world. It is strange to imagine a world without David. I use this picture that he took to represent a kind of strange way that he saw the world. It was a magnificent way of seeing the world. He took a picture of a flower, used an unusual kind of lighting, and now every time I look at this, I wonder what's going on in the picture. I wonder what he was seeing with his eyes and his lens. It looks to me like there's a bird or a flying creature that's trying to come out of that, and I don't know if it was there or not. But somehow, when I saw through his eyes, he always had a way of helping us to see more than what we had originally seen. David was an absolutely brilliant man, and everyone who knew him was better for having known him because he allowed us to see the world through his eyes. It's a sad time to be dying when we need to be keeping distant from each other. There's a part of me that thinks that his soul was not meant to do social distancing. And so by his death, he is actually in some ways closer to each one of us. In Jewish tradition, we do not know what happens when someone dies. We know that how they live their life now is what matters, how they live and how many people they've touched with their lives and influenced when they were alive. That's what matters. But I also believe that the soul lives on. I believe that there are messages that David could give us. As someone once said, his voice still speaks to us. There are so many lessons that we've learned from him. The man was an expert on everything, and we all learned something from him. So now, at a time when we need to stay separated from each other, we take comfort in the fact that we can still be remembering him together. We remember to tell stories about him. It seemed to me in this memorial service that is different from any other that I have ever done, that it would be in some ways more important for you to see the words that were chosen to be able to remember him, and to see the pictures so that you see the world through his eyes. May his memory be a blessing. Zichrono livracha. Death will come. We cannot enter in judgment with it. Our question, why, will always go unanswered. But this does not mean that we are helpless in the face of death. We can, and we do, rob death of ultimate victory by living our lives so that when death comes, it takes us from a world, one corner of which is a little better because we were there. We remember David, Dr. Saphier, and join our hearts together to give comfort and strength to his family. Mourning is a time filled with many emotions and memories, both bitter and sweet. We begin our service with the recitation of psalms, poems, and prayers, thus linking David's life with the millennia-old tradition of the people Israel and the eternity of God. Birth is a beginning. and death a destination. And life is a journey from childhood to maturity and youth to age, from innocence to awareness and ignorance to knowing, from foolishness to discretion and then perhaps to wisdom, from weakness to strength or strength to weakness and often back again, from health to sickness and back we pray to health again, from offense to forgiveness, from loneliness to love, from joy to gratitude, from pain to compassion, and grief to understanding, from fear to faith, from defeat to defeat to defeat, until looking backward or ahead, we see that victory lies not at some high place along the way, but in having made the journey, stage by stage, a sacred pilgrimage. Birth is a beginning, and death a destination, and life is a journey, a sacred pilgrimage to life everlasting.
In the awkwardness of mourning from a distance, we find comfort in that idea that so many of us can come together to remember David from across the globe. And we find comfort in the God whose traditions David so actively supported, so actively loved to engage in. And so we recite together a psalm of comfort, Psalm 23. Mizmor le David, Adonai ro'i lo echsar, binod desha yarbitzeni, al me menuchot yanahaleni, nafshi yeshovev, yancheni b'ma'agle tzedek, lema'an shemo. Adonai is my shepherd, I shall not want, giving me repose in green meadows, leading me beside the still waters to revive my spirit, guiding me on the right path, for that is God's essence. Gam ki elech begates al mavet, lo ira ra ki ata imadi. Though I walk through a valley of the shadow of death, I fear no harm, for you are with me. Shiftecha umishantecha hema yenachamuni, ta'aroch lefanai shulchan neged tzorarai, dishanta v'Hashem en roshi kosi revaya. Your staff and your rod comfort me. You prepare a banquet for me in the presence of my foes. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Ach tov v'chesed yirdefuni, kol yemei chayai, v'shafti b'veit Adonai le'orech yamim. And I shall dwell in the house of Adonai forever. At least for the few short months that I knew him, David was a person of intensity and of passion for the things and the people and the causes that he loved. He brings up in my mind this verse from Kohelet, Kol asher timsa yadcha la'asot bechochacha aseh. Whatever it is in your power to do, do it with all of your might. And I believe that he did everything with all of his might, with that kind of intensity, because he was fully aware of another teaching of Kohelet, that there's a time for everything. He knew that his time was limited, and so he spent it with intention and with intensity. And so with that, we read another portion from Kohelet, from Ecclesiastes. A season is set for everything, a time for every experience under heaven, a time for planting and a time for reaping, a time for keeping and a time for discarding, a time for loving and a time for hating, a time for embracing and a time for refraining, a time for slaying and a time for healing, a time for laughing and a time for weeping, a time for dancing and a time for wailing, a time for birthing and a time for dying, a time for speaking and a time for silence, a time for seeking and a time for losing.
Thank you, Rabbi Sydni. It is time for us to focus on his babies. He bred Shih Tzus, and he loved Shih Tzus, and he kept Shih Tzus. I can't even count how many litters his puppies had, and I don't know how often he was able to give them away because he kept many. He just loved them so much. They were what kept him going every day. He was also taking pictures of them, as you can tell. There were many, many pictures that he took. we'll talk more again about his photography, and we'll see some more of his pictures. I wanted to remind you that he was born in England and that he had moved to Israel. And he was a graduate student in Israel and completed research there. And he taught graduate students in Israel. When he came to America, he was doing research at what was then known as at the LSU Medical Center. And he was very well respected and prolific. We put a link in the video of things that he had published since he was in Shreveport, and the list is huge. Imagine then when he was taking my Hebrew class, knowing that he taught Hebrew at universities in Israel, and he was learning things from my class. I would always feel like I had accomplished something amazing because his Hebrew was wonderful. So one day I decided to ask him to teach the children, and that wasn't usually the kind of children that he was used to dealing with. These little guys, the ones in the picture, those are the kind of kids that he liked to deal with. He didn't necessarily feel that his strength was teaching young children. But he started teaching the 3rd graders through the 7th graders, and the kids absolutely loved him. They liked saying that he was the fun teacher, and there is no family that had him teaching the children where they weren't thrilled to have him as a teacher. I think it surprised him, and then he realized that he had a passion for it. Almost anything that he ever tried, he became wonderful at. That wasn't a surprise. So he became more and more involved in the Jewish community since he moved to Shreveport. He was everywhere, it seemed, in the Jewish community. He was at services all of the time for both congregations. He was often a designated driver for seniors. He somehow was driving from one congregation to the other congregation. Sometimes it surprised me that a intimidatingly tall, British, somewhat awkward man in Shreveport, Louisiana, managed to connect to everybody at almost any level. I always thought that he had this uncanny ability to be caring and connect with people. Sometimes he was also very helpful to many people, and not just as a driver, but he would help with his medical knowledge and his expertise on almost anything, because anyone who knew him knew that he was an expert on just about everything. I kind of think of him a little bit like a Forrest Gump in our local Jewish community, because he seemed to have been everywhere. If I had questions about Israel, it seemed that he was there. If we have questions about the medical field, he was there. If we have questions about anything, he was always there. And he always had a lot of knowledge and was happy to share that. I don't want to pretend that it was always rosy, because not only was he able to make friends with everyone he came in contact with, but he was also able to somehow find that people he knew would somehow push buttons that got him a little bit upset, and it would take a little bit of a lot of apologizing on our parts to get back in his good graces. But most of us worked hard at getting back to his good graces, because nobody didn't want to be his friend. It was a privilege to have him in our world. At least that's how I felt, and almost anyone I know felt that way. I don't know if you know this about him, but as active as he was in the Jewish community, when he was growing up, his family wasn't a specifically religious family. They were a very Jewish committed family, but not necessarily religious. And as a young man, he did not have a bar mitzvah celebration. He did not lead services. And so at some point a few years ago, he decided that that was something that he wanted to do. And so he partnered up with Debbie DeLynn, and in 2016 they led a service, and he read from the Torah and he did a speech. And I recently found that speech, and I was humbled by how unbelievably appropriate it was to the time that we're going through right now. It wasn't his intention to be talking about this. I don't think that he could possibly have known that we were going to be going through a pandemic, or that we were going to lose him so young. But I would like you to hear, in his own words, his insights about life. Let me tell you that the Torah portion that they read included one of the biggest conflicts in the Torah, that Korach was rebelling. And so obviously he's going to begin his Torah sermon about whether it was important for him to be picking a conflict kind of a sermon and Torah portion. But I think you'll find that he has turned this into an amazingly insightful thing. And I think that the insights that he gives about his Torah portion will help us remember him.
Truly, that word's not in what I'm reading now.
Read what's read.
I was very glad to hear that the Torah portion that Debbie and I would be reading would be about the Korach story. Korach went down. No. You may think that I want to discuss rebellion. You would only be partially correct. I want to discuss something to do with how the rebellion was ended. It was, and I quote from the selection I just read, "The Eternal brings about something unheard of, so that the ground opens its mouth and swallows them up with all that belongs to them." Not just, It was that mouth, that thing that was unheard of, that intrigued me. I remembered hearing about it in something from Jewish mysticism or Kabbalah. There is a teaching that just as God had finished creating the universe, just before the seventh day, the last moment before that first day of rest, the mystics tell us that God created a few special things. Some of these were the tablets of the law, the staff that Moses used, the manna, and the mouth of the well that provided food and water in the wilderness. But the first thing that God made at that moment, between creation and resting, was the mouth of the earth that swallowed Korach. Why were these things so important that God had to create them at that very last creation moment before Shabbat? And honestly, it was at that very moment itself, that twilight between the 6 days and the Shabbat, the Sabbath, that intrigued me the most. The sages and the ethics of the fathers taught that there is a halachic, or you might say Torah legal, definition that says that twilight is a time period that marks the transition between days when nightfall hasn't quite yet occurred, which means that it isn't quite yesterday and not quite tomorrow yet. In fact, it is a part of the day when both yesterday and tomorrow, night and day, each overlap. It is a sign that humans are actually ignorant about the actual ending or beginning of a day. Hasidic teaching explains why twilight may represent the aspects of humans who are actually somehow extra aware. Something that transitions from one thing to another needs to include elements of both states. For example, imagine what kind of creativity goes into writing a poem in English or in Hebrew. Now imagine that someone can translate a poem from English to Hebrew or from Hebrew to English. They must possess creative knowledge in both languages, while the author of the poem only needed to know one. We can find these extra capabilities when we find twilight moments in Jewish history. Nachmanides noted that each millennium is preceded by a twilight, an overlapping period which, while technically belonging to the previous millennium, contains the beginnings of the next. Thus, Abraham was born 52 years before the third millennium. King Solomon built the first temple 72 years before the fourth millennium. And there are other examples. The significance of this time is of primary relevance to our generation. According to Jewish tradition, we are now in the year 5776. 5776 from creation. which means that we've entered the final quarter of the sixth millennium. We are potentially living in a most crucial juncture of history, the twilight that translates 6,000 years of human toil and achievement into a period that is only Shabbat, Sabbath, and rest for life everlasting. Right now, we stand at this most unique moment of history. At this time of transition, we are right now on the threshold between today and tomorrow, daylight and nightfall, between the work week and Shabbat. And as 6 millennia of human endeavor approach their climax into the tranquil perfection of the eternal Shabbat, we are in a sense in possession of the best of both worlds. Let us seize the moment.
From a Torah portion that most people see as being about conflict and challenge, he saw transition and peace, hope for a better time. He had an incredible ability to see the world with eyes that saw beyond the superficial. That's why his research was so successful. That's why he was able to be such a good photographer. That's why he was able to be an expert on everything. That's why people valued his friendship. That's why it was easy for him to make friends. Sometimes his ability to see things beyond what others saw was why so many people had complicated relationships with him. He always wanted what was best. If you counted him as your friend or your mentor or your colleague, you probably spent some time in discussions with him about how his way was best. I already miss that. We will also miss his intense drive to be helpful, his ability to turn almost anything into a clever conversation that would usually include a good, hearty laugh. Those clever conversations would ideally include wordplay in multiple languages if possible. He made everyone who knew him more aware of the world around us. I want to quote one of the comments that someone sent. A number of people are commenting, and it's nice to see even the comments in the chat. But someone who was also another past president of Agudath Achim and who was a colleague at LSU Medical Center, Dr. Richard Zweig, said that David was an excellent scientist. He studied the relationships between stress and inflammatory responses in the brain, collaborating successfully with colleagues in Shreveport, in Israel, and all over the world before his premature retirement. David was a great lover of Judaism and Israel. He was always passionate. He was quite a character. We will remember Dr. David Saphier. He was a man of science, a man of faith, a man of conviction, a man of passion, a man of compassion. If he changed your life for the better, please continue to share stories about him. Let his compassion, intelligence, and influence continue to be a blessing in this world. I wanted to share this picture with you that David took many years ago in Jerusalem. His heart has always been in Israel, and I love this picture because it's nighttime, and sometimes when we are in a moment of unknown or wondering about what will happen as we enter our next phase, he found sparkles in the night, and I wanted to remember him with a picture like this. One other person who wanted to speak to you is Peter Saphier, his brother from England.
I'd like to say a few words about my brother, David Saphier. Many of you are probably aware that David and I had a somewhat turbulent relationship over the years, and this was not made any easier by the fact that we were living on different continents for much of our lives. We were recently on better terms, and I am extremely grateful that our last telephone conversation a few weeks ago was particularly amicable. Because of our shared interests in science and medicine, we had many interesting and enjoyable conversations over the years, often about the latest medical topics. Most recently, of course, we spoke about the coronavirus pandemic. David was on good form, and others have told me that they noticed that he seemed to be upbeat and optimistic of late. Therefore, I was dreadfully shocked and greatly saddened when I heard that he had been found deceased last Saturday. I would like to express my immense gratitude to Rabbi Jana for all that she has done for David, his family, and his many friends in Shreveport and elsewhere. Despite the many difficulties in his life, he was truly remarkable for his great resilience and self-reliance. Indeed, I had sometimes thought that despite his many medical problems, he would outlive us all. Sadly, this was not meant to be. David resolutely lived life on his own terms. I will miss him.
יש כוכבים שאורם מגיע ארצה רק כאשר הם עצמם עבדו ואינם. יש אנשים שזיו זכרם מאיר כאשר הם עצמם אינם יותר בתוכנו. There are stars up above, so far away we only see their light long, long after the star itself is gone. And so it is with people that we loved. Their memories keep shining ever brightly, though their time with us is done. But the stars that light up the darkest night, these are the lights that guide us. As we live our days, these are the ways we remember. I see this prayer as a way of ushering the soul to its next adventure. I'll read it in Hebrew, and then we'll read a translation in English. El malei rachamim shochen b'maromim, hamsei menucha nechona tachat kanfei hashechina, im kedoshim uteorim kezohar harakia mazhirim et nishmat David ben Shmuel v'Hadassah shehalach le'olamo. Ba'al harachamim yastirehu beseter knafav le'olamim, v'yitzru b'tzor ha'chaim et nishmato. Adonai hu nachlato, v'yanuach b'shalom al mishkavo, v'nomar Amen. God of abundant mercy, God Most High, may the soul of our loved one who has gone into eternity find the gift of perfect peace in your embrace, together with the holy and pure, whose light shines like the radiance of heaven. Compassionate God, hold him close to you forever, so that his soul may be bound up in the bond of life eternal. May he find a home with you, and may he find God of abundant mercy, God Most High, may the soul of our loved one who has gone into eternity find the gift of perfect peace in your embrace, together with the holy and pure, whose light shines like the radiance of heaven. Compassionate God, hold him close to you forever, so that his soul may be bound up in the bond of life eternal. May he find a home with you, and may he rest in peace. Together we say, Amen. May the love and eternal connection of our souls give us strength as we turn to recite the words hallowed by time, sanctifying the name of God. We honor the memory of Dr. David John Saphier with the words of Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shmei Rabbah, be'alma divra chiruteh v'yamlich malchuteh, b'chayechon u'v'yomechon u'v'chayei d'chol Beit Yisrael, ba'agala u'vizman kariv v'imru Amen. Yehei shmei Rabbah mevarach la'alam u'l'almei almaya. Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitromam v'yitnaseh v'yithadar v'yit'aleh v'yithalal shmei d'kudsha barichu. La'ela min kol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, da'amiran be'alma v'imru amen. Yehe shalama rabba min shemaya, v'chaim aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. Oseh shalom b'mromav, hu ya'aseh shalom, aleinu v'al kol Yisrael, v'imru amen. May the Holy One of Blessing, from whom all things come, and to whom all things return, give us light and peace on this day of grief and mourning, and may our service of memory for Dr. David bring comfort and strength. Adonai Natan, v'Adonai Lakach, Yehi Shem Adonai Mevorach. With Job we have said, God you have given, God you have taken away, blessed be the name of God. May the memory of David be a blessing as we mark that his essence will never leave our hearts and souls. Give me the vision, O God, to see that embedded in each of your gifts is a core of eternity, undiminished and bright, an eternity that survives the dread hours of affliction. Those I have loved, though now beyond my view, have given form and quality to my being. They have led me into the wide universe I continue to inhabit, and their presence is more real to me than their absence. What you have given to me, O God, you never take away, and bounties granted once shed their radiance evermore.
This past summer, when the Israeli scouts came to visit Shreveport, David was so excited to meet them, to practice his Hebrew with them. And that was far from the only instance that I saw his incredible passion for both Israel and for the Hebrew language. And so in remembrance of that love, of that passion for Israel and the Hebrew language, I'll sing one of Israel's informal anthems, a song that speaks about the eternal nature of memory and of being, a trait that I hope that we can carry forward in our memory for David. This is Eli, Eli, a walk from Caesarea by David Zahavi and Hannah Senesh. Eli, Eli, shelo yigamer leolam, hachol v'hayam, rish rush shel hamayim, beherak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam, hachol v'hayam, rish rush shel hamayim, beherak hashamayim, tfilat ha'adam. O God, my God, I pray that these things never end. The sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart, the sand and the sea, the rush of the waters, the crash of the heavens, the prayer of the heart.
Thank you, Rabbi Sydni. As we conclude our service, let all who are gathered here repeat these words, speaking them to the mourners. Hamakom yinachem etchem b'toch she'ar avelei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May God console you with all who mourn in Zion and Jerusalem. May we continue to be inspired by the life lessons we learn from David. May we find blessings in the twilight. Now go forth in peace to life. It is a strange time we are in. Some people call this potentially the dawn of a new age. David talked about it as a twilight, as a new beginning. According to the Torah, there was evening and there was morning, and that's what made days. We begin with the night. As he put it, we begin with rest. There is a darkness to our lives now that David is not here. There's a mystery in the world about how we're going to continue after this pandemic. The sparkle in David's eyes would have seen us all, the whole world, coming together, because we're in this together. But I, for one, am going to find it difficult to find my way without him. He had all the answers. I hope that your day is blessed. I hope that all your memories of David are blessed. And before we stop our gathering, I wanted to share with you one of David's favorite blessings. Yivarechecha Adonai v'yishmerecha. May God bless you. May God protect you. Yair Adonai panav elecha v'chuneka. May the light of God's face shine upon you, be gracious to you. Yisa Adonai panav elecha v'yasem lecha shalom. May God's face always be lifted up to you, not only when you're as tall as David Saphier, but God has something that God looks up to you about. David always looked up to you. May God grant you peace. Shalom. Be safe.